Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining us at www.sonic-cinema.com as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. You can check out the podcast at YouTube as well as basically anywhere that you check out podcasts, be it Apple, Google, Spotify, and other platforms. Check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. Patrons will be getting quite a bit of content this month with short film blocks from the Renegade Film Festival, which I did last week, and as well as my Oscar discussion, as well as my breakdown of my favorite movie scores of 2021, and that is going to be at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. So it's funny. There's actually quite a few pretty big anniversaries coming out this year, but there are a few bigger, I would argue, than the 50th anniversary of Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather. And this is a discussion that my guest and I had been kind of toying with for a little bit, like ever since we first started talking about having him on the podcast. And he is the host of the Movie Loop podcast, which I was grateful enough to join in January to discuss silent cinema, and it's a pleasure to have him back for this discussion on The Godfather. This is Carlo from the Movie Loop. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me again, Brian.
What do you have going on the Movie Loop? I know last month you did romantic comedies. We did silent films in January. What do you have coming up in March?
Well, we just also released at the end of February, we released a special episode number 10 dedicated to The Silence of the Lambs, just one scene from Silence of the Lambs. We already recorded our next episode, which will be dedicated to the Oscars, this year's Oscars. And we're pretty much almost set for all the year. I have almost all year set up already. I think I only have like 2 or 3 months still to settle. But other than that, we have a lot of great stuff in store.
All right, yeah, and I really enjoy the format that you have over there. Whether it's doing deep dives into certain discussions like we did with the silent films, or some of the other ones where you're basically going through some of the movies that you watch throughout the month and picking specific criteria. It's really a fun podcast to listen, and I definitely recommend it for people to check out.
Thank you.
So we are here to talk about The Godfather, and this is one of the landmarks of the modern age of movies, I think. It's pretty safe to say, and it's based on the novel by Mario Puzo, who co-wrote the screenplay with Francis Ford Coppola, and it was the Best Picture winner for the 1972 movie year, and it won Marlon Brando Best Actor, but did not win Coppola Best Director, surprisingly. That went to Bob Fosse for Cabaret. I know first of all, when did you watch The Godfather for the first time?
I was trying to think when preparing for the podcast, I was trying to think when was the first time, and it wasn't. The Godfather is not a staple in local television. I live in Puerto Rico, so it's not a staple like maybe it is in the States. I've heard that it's kind of a staple maybe in Thanksgiving or around that time, but it isn't here. So I'm pretty sure I got to it when I started to get into films more seriously, probably in the 90s when I was in college or around that time. But I think it's one of those checkbox that I did pretty early when I started to really dig into movies.
Yeah, I know for me it was kind of that. I think it was in high school was when I got to watching it, or maybe if I just graduated from high school, it was somewhere in like that 94 to 96 range for me.
Yeah.
I know it was before the 20th anniversary. I actually have not taken a chance to see the restoration in theaters. Maybe I'll get a chance to this week. We'll see. But I know that one of the things that even as I was starting to get into films, even watching it, not only one of the things I always find kind of fascinating about this film is not only is it an artistically made film and won the Oscar for Best Picture, but it's also a very entertaining film. I think a lot of that has to do with the material that's drawing on, and one of the things I've always heard about Puso's novels that it's kind of pulpy. It's kind of a pulpy one. It's not necessarily intended to be taken as a truly serious piece of literature. It's kind of like Peter Benchley's Jaws in that respect. But what Coppola does in his adaptation of it is he basically creates this just wonderful mosaic of basically making a defining crime film as far as American culture goes.
Yeah, and one interesting thing is how to define this film. And because when people talk about crime films, they tend to think about maybe more action-oriented films.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not against that definition, but I tend to think about this film more like a drama or even a family drama about people that happen to be criminals, not necessarily like a crime film with lots of action. It's just that they are criminals.
Yeah. No, and I think that is definitely one of the more interesting aspects about the film is the fact that Coppola basically does create this world that's very insular. It doesn't have a lot of scope in terms of the locations that's taking place. I mean, we do see Michael in Italy for a bit, but ultimately it's very much in New York and in that upper New York crime family type world. And then as we go, and we can talk a little bit about the sequels, but especially when it comes to part 2, you start to see that world expand. And I was actually, when I saw Matt Reeves' The Batman a few weeks ago, one of the things that really stood out to me was I likened it to The Godfather, and basically what Matt Reeves does with Gotham is that it's a very insular world. It's very much focused on Gotham as an environment, and then you just see, and it starts out with Batman, it starts out with Penguin, Catwoman, all of them, and then you see that world just expand as you get to know those characters, as you follow those characters. And it was and one of the things that I'm so fascinated by is when a filmmaker is able to create that type of world and just effortlessly create this epic sprawling narrative around it.
And I love the word that you used earlier, the word mosaic, because like you said, there are so many pieces coming together into this film. There are so many factors and characters and little stories that combine into what we see in the end. You start watching the film, and even 30 minutes in, the full story hasn't. I mean, Michael hasn't even come into place, who eventually becomes the main character of the whole trilogy, right? But 30 minutes in, you barely see Michael, and I love that setup, and maybe we'll get to it later, but I love the setup of the wedding. The wedding, it's an excellent opening scene, and it sets up so many pieces and so many characters and so many stories. It's an excellent staging ground for everything that's going to happen after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that wedding sequence, when I rewatched the movie Friday in preparation for this discussion, that wedding sequence is just brilliant in the way that Coppola constructs it because of the fact that you start out with you start out in the Don's office, and he's hearing these, he's hearing people, ask him for favors on Connie's wedding day. And you also, not only do you get an idea of who he is, who Tom Reagan is, to basically who every character is. Like, every character, to a certain extent, is at least developed, at least in terms of who they are at the beginning, and even if we don't necessarily know where that's going to take them moving forward. And you get broad strokes about Michael, you get broad strokes about Fredo and Sonny and Connie and Kay. You get these ideas of who these characters are. You see Clemenza, you see Tessio, and you, like you said, you get the pieces in place for where the narrative's going to go, even if you're not entirely sure. And starting out with the mortuary, the Undertaker's speech of I believe in America, and how he, and it's like you're basically telling the audience essentially what the thesis is of why the Corleones to so many people are important, because of the fact that, and it's funny, just, and it's interesting how to consider just how much of that, to a certain extent, there's still a little bit of truth to the idea that the justice system in America is not just. And so, you start to think about your own, the morality of what the Corleones might have to offer to somebody.
Yeah, and it's a perfect setup for everything, because when Bonacera starts saying I believe in America, and he starts making this request to the Don for justice, it's because he sees, like you said, the justice system failed him, and he's reverting to this second option. But behind all that, and it's something that is maybe more expanded on the sequel, but you see it here at least mentioned, you can see that what is this America that he's talking about, and ultimately this is an America that it's broken, an America that's where criminals are the ones that are making quote unquote justice, where powerful people are the ones that thrive, where the weak are maybe pushed down, where senators can be bought over, which is the chip that the families are trying to bargain for. You have to put all of the senators on your pocket, and we want a share of that. And this is the America that they are talking about, an America that is ultimately broken in terms of justice and politics and economics and whatnot. And I think it's really interesting that the film starts that way.
Yeah, and Gordon Willis's cinematography is justifiably iconic and memorable. And one of the things that you notice in it is the use of shadows and the use of just contrasts of light. Like, you have the light, the brightness of what the weather looks outside in the wedding versus the darkness of Vito's office. And you see that throughout the film, as far as like whether you're in that office versus when you're out of that office. And the way they use the light is the way they use lighting, the way they use different atmospheres, different times of day, just is really, really quite impactful. And it's one of the movies that really makes the case for why great cinematography is an important part of the storytelling process.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, this I'm gonna maybe deviate a bit, but this reminds me of probably my favorite scene from the sequel, and probably one of my favorite scene, if not my favorite scene of all time from any movie, which is the scene between Michael and Fredo at the house in Tahoe. And it's a scene where they're talking in this room, extremely dark. And I've always seen, and I even recorded a podcast about this, and I say it is cold outside because it is snowing outside, but it is dark inside, which is I always see as a representation of Michael's persona, cold outside and dark inside. And I think you can see something of that here, but in respect to Vito, it is maybe hot, warm outside, which is more of his persona. Vito is warmer than Michael, and gentler and kinder, quote unquote, right? But it is still dark. There's still darkness inside, and that's what you see when he's doing his business in this office. And something that struck me, I think it has always struck me a lot, but I think I picked up on it more this time when I was rewatching it. But it's the thing that these people are constantly saying, this is business, this is not family, or don't mix family with business, and yet everything they're doing is pretty much mixed up with family. Here you have a wedding, and during the wedding, they're making this quote unquote business transactions, and you see it all across the movie. I mean, the business and family is so intertwined all throughout the film that you can separate it. I mean, even towards the end, Michael refers constantly to the family business, and that mix up of things obviously extends to the consequences of it all for a lot of the family members.
Yeah, that is an interesting, very interesting point. And it basically, like you said, there really is not anything. It just goes to show that for people like the Corleones, I mean, really anybody, it's like you can say it's business and not personal, but there's always going to be a personal aspect to it. And I mean, you're right. There's always a personal aspect to the way the actions are, to what actions happen here. Whether it's the Don being shot down early on in the film when he rejects the proposition of getting in the drug business, or Sonny going after the Tatalias and the other crime families in retaliation, or Michael, or Michael gunning. He says, it's not personal; it's strictly business. When he's going to, when he's going to the restaurant, but the fact of the matter is, it's like, of course, it's personal for him because of the fact that he wants to. He's going to get revenge, and as much as he wants to say it. But yeah, that is an excellent point on the use of light and darkness, especially when it comes to Vito. And one of the things that's really interesting about Vito Corleone in this movie is the fact that he is you get the sense that age has maybe, and you don't really notice it completely until the second one, where you see the rise of Vito Corleone and the De Niro performance. But as he's gotten older, you kind of, because really Vito Corleone in this movie does not want anybody killed. Even the person who wants justice for his daughter, he's like, don't kill this person. Just injure him. And so he doesn't want vengeance against the people who've been trying to take his family down. He wants to make peace for his family, and the biggest victim really that we see Vito have is the horse, the producer's horse. And it's really, and that is one of those things that just really, it's one of those moments where you start to see the contrast in the way he operates things to the way that Michael was going to operate things as he gets close more and more into this world.
Yeah, and obviously there's a gap between what we see from Vito from his rise, which is very, very, very early on in his rise in Godfather 2, and when we see him here in The Godfather. So there's a gap there, which maybe we don't know. He did business during that time, and how he handled things. But I agree. I think that juxtaposition of how Vito did business and how Michael, who proves to be more cold and ruthless, it does his thing. And I think that extends. I mean, you can see there's a difference, and I go back to what I said about Vito's warmth and quote unquote kindness. You can even see that in his relationship with his wife, and it's something that I at least wanted to bring at some point. I think the role of Vito's wife is, even though it's mostly a background role, I think it's really important, because you can see, despite what I was saying, you can see there's a separation. I mean, there's a respect of what we're doing and how we are doing it, which is something that Michael could not achieve with Kay.
Yeah,
he wasn't able to achieve that with Kay, and you see the consequences of it later on the other movies, and you even see at some points Vito's wife even intercede at some point. Don't interfere. I think it's when they're having dinner, and Sonny, after Vito's, I think Vito was injured, and they are having dinner, and Sonny's talking business at the table, and they're starting like fighting or arguing, and she says, no, don't interfere. And you can see a bit of that. There's definitely a difference in both. And I think that's a very, very, very strong point and strong message that the film is sending through. If that is what ultimately is the downfall of Michael, we don't know, but at least we saw that Vito managed to have a quote unquote relatively successful run as a Don. But even despite that, you can see that he probably achieved that role as Godfather, not by keeping his hands clean. I mean, when he meets with all the families and he throws that veiled threat when he says, if anything happens to my son, any accident, if he's shot by some police or if some lightning bolt hits him, some people here are gonna pay for that. So you can see that he's obviously a threatening figure, and he probably had to dirty up his hands at some point. But he's at a point in his career where he doesn't need that, and maybe he doesn't want that. I don't know if it's regret or something, but or that aspirations of legitimacy that also Michael wants or thinks he wants. But I think it's an interesting contrast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's it's hard to think about just the first film on its own terms without considering at least the first sequel. And because of the fact that like this one is about essentially the fall of Vito Corleone and the rise of Michael, whereas in the second one you see the rise of Vito Corleone and the eventual fall of Michael. And you get that contrast. It's just such a huge sprawling narrative, it's hard to see one without the other. And it's just really the way that Coppola envisioned this as a filmmaker, as a writer, and just really looking at this from the as and it's funny because of the fact that Coppola is very much in a way to a certain extent you could almost say Coppola is sort of become a godfather in his own right because of you see how much of his family has become filmmakers, and to a certain extent how some of his family the people who've come after him have sort of taken the reins from him a little bit, as opposed to him just being this towering presence.
Yeah, and the way the grasp he had on the filmmaking business during the 70s. And now he's semi-retired, and now that he's coming back, he's probably saying at some point, just when I thought I was out, they dragged me back in.
Yeah.
Let's hope that he gets to make that final film.
I do too, because I know he was originally going to make Megapolis in around the time that 9/11 happened, and that's part of the reason why he ended up shelving it. So I do hope he's able to get that off the ground and at least give us one last big epic. Yeah, but yeah, you're right about him in the 70s. He's just such a few filmmakers have had quite a run as The Godfather, The Godfather 2, The Conversation, and Apocalypse Now. That's just as much of an all-timer run of films as anything. And as much as I love The Godfather, I do think Apocalypse Now is probably his best film of that, just because of how much he was able to wrestle the chaos of that production into something that is just absolutely singular as a story.
Yeah, you definitely have to give him credit for that, because to make something, when you see, we did talk a bit about Hearts of Darkness, right, in our documentary episode, but to think that he could make something so great and at least coherent out of the mess that was the film, that it's impressive.
Yeah. I would of course be remiss if I didn't mention the score for Nino Rota, who was Fellini's longtime composer. That's what he's best known for outside of The Godfather. Didn't win an Oscar for this. Wasn't even nominated for technical reasons. I'm still kind of baffled by that. The music branch of the Academy always kind of baffles me as far as why some scores get nominated over or are considered over others. And this is one of those. He won for Part 2, which is kind of the definition of how much of that is truly original. But them and I have very different definitions of what constitutes an original score. But no, it's just such. You listen to that theme and just starting out, and it just really captures your attention, and it's so mournful, it's so beautiful, it's used in so many different ways in this movie, and I just absolutely, I've always been just completely transfixed by this score.
Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful score. I'm not a musician, so I listen to the score, I love it, but it's not something that I can probably grasp my head around or fully analyze. But it definitely has those qualities that you mentioned. It's very, very mournful, very, very subdued, and it has a presence of its own. You listen to bits of the notes of that score, and you can immediately recognize, this is The Godfather.
Yeah. Who do you think who do you think gives the best performance in this movie?
Oh my God. um, okay. I have three that I juggle back and forth. And I think my top spot is Al Pacino.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe my second, and I don't know if this maybe might be surprising, but Robert Duvall is amazing. This film,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's incredible, and I think it's the most subtle or nuanced performance of the bunch.
Yeah.
I think he's amazing. I mean, I even wrote it. I was taking my notes, and at some point I wrote, Duvall is amazing in this, which is something that I've always been aware of, but I had to write it down. I have to say this. And then Brando is great. I might not be as hot in his performance as others, given that I'm putting two other above him. But he's great. He's definitely great. And one thing that I wanted to bring up, because I found out this week that Brando was 40 something, 48 or 47. I couldn't believe it. I mean, the makeup is amazing.
Yeah.
And you don't notice it because the way he acts, all his physical performance, you can swear this is a man in his 60s, and this is a man that is ill and aging and all that. And so it's great.
Yeah, a lot of people, I mean, so many people focus on the method aspects of Brando's performance, like the cotton balls in the mouth and the cat and all of that stuff. But his performance is just it's captivating from 1 minute to the next. And then you look at a scene. One of the scenes in the scene in this movie that always is heart-wrenching is when he's been brought home after getting shot, and he asks about Michael, and Tom and Sonny tell him what happened, and you can just see his heart break because he never he never wanted that for Michael. And it was something that wasn't really it was something that wasn't really verbally made clear early in the film. But you kind of noticed it just based on the fact that Michael was a war hero. Michael was somebody who stands aside from the life that Sonny and Fredo and Tom are a part of, and that moment is just such a beautiful piece of acting from Brando. It's so subtle too, and then you have this scene where he finds out that Sonny's been killed, and he just has so many wonderful moments that it's one of those things where you really, it's like Brando in the later part of his career is kind of, he's kind of a joke to a certain extent and he's kind of, you hear about the troubled nature of like filmmakers who had to work with him, how much of a struggle it was, but he's got these little grace notes, these little moments in this performance that really reminds you why he was considered one of the great actors and why it may be the great actor coming out when he did.
Yeah, and I mean, when I grew up, all I knew about Brando was this later films on his career. I didn't get to his first films until maybe the last 10, 20 years. But even around that time, because I was listening to an interview a couple of weeks ago with Christopher Reeve, where he says that Brando's heart wasn't in the filming of Superman, Like, he's not into it, and he doesn't care. He ultimately doesn't care. We all know that Brando had a complicated, like I said, later career. His relationship with the Hollywood system was definitely the best. Even with Coppola in Apocalypse Now. I mean, we all know about that. And later on, it becomes, like you said, more of a joke. I mean, the score, the Island of Dr. Moreau, all the stories that you hear about whatever happened during the filming of those movies is maybe more interesting than the films itself.
Yeah.
But he's so great in this, and like you said, there are so many little things, so many little gestures, so many facial expressions, raising of an eyebrow, the nod of the head, so many little details. I mean, even little things like even something as inconsequential as the cat, which I read, I don't know if it's true or not, but I read that he picked up the cat like it was a stray cat or something that he brought to set to filming, and it's become such an icon of that Don persona. But such great things, and the thing that, and you mentioned it, but I think the thing that we get more of his character, especially towards the second half of the film, is regret. And you see that regret even from the moment when Michael sort of takes up the mantle of Don, and when they tell him that Michael is the one that killed Soloso, and his face is, no, get everybody out. I don't want to deal with this right now. And his conversation in the yard with Michael, which is an excellent moment. I never wanted this for you. I always wanted. He says something like there are a lot of his lines have to do with regret and how he regrets that this happened to Michael, or how he regrets that things turned out to be. But in the background, you can see I regret maybe the life choices that I made.
Yeah.
And he transmits that with his expression, and not just his words, but his facial expression and all his demeanor.
Yeah, and especially especially the scene with where he finds out that Sonny has been killed, and that's one of those first moments where you really start to see that regret, where it's like, what have I done for this to happen to my family? And it's one of those things where you realize that for the Don, family means more to him than anything. And you get that early on in the wedding, where it's like, he won't have the wedding pictures taken without Michael. Michael's got to be there. Otherwise, no, I'm not interested. And and so that's just one of those things where, but he's also very aware of the fact that, if he's, with Carlo, with Connie's new husband, it's like, give him a living, but don't make him a part of the family business. And that's a little seed right there, where it's like, you start to wonder, it's like, is that the reason why Carlo is so abusive towards Connie? Does he feel like he's been passed over? Does he feel like he's been disrespected? And that's why, because it's hard to imagine that he would have been like that with her before they got married. So it's like, what's changed after they got married? Does he just feel entitled to do it? Is that a part of just who he is? Or is it a part of something where it's like, is that something that's just simmering along the surface, where, because of the fact that it's the choice that Vito made to not bring him in on the family business? Is that the reason why Carlo does the things that he does? And it's really that weighing sequence is brilliant because it sets into motion so many of the things that we're going to see throughout the rest of the film, whether we understand those things or not. I mean, that little thing between Tom and Vito where he tells Tom, it's like, give him a living, but don't, talk to him about the business.
It's great that you bring that up, because I don't know if Carlos' decisions were based on that specifically, and that's an excellent point to maybe mull over. But it also reminds me how this film is, in many ways, a deconstruction of this illusion of masculinity and what is strong man. And you see it in pretty much every character, not the old characters, but you see it in Sonny, you see it in Fredo, you see it in Michael and Carlo. Unsuccessful marriages, unable to hold relationships. You see Sonny's being with other women. You see Fredo. We don't see a lot of Fredo's family, not even in the second film, but in the second film you see he's with a new woman, I think, or with something, but he's with many women, and he's banging waitress too. But you see, obviously Michael. You see Michael marriage with Kay, which, and you know what it will become. So there's this sense about what does it mean to be a man, and even the Don says to one of them at some point. I think he says it to Johnny Fontaine. He said, "You need to spend time with your family. If you don't spend time with your family, you're not a man."
Yeah.
But they all fail in that aspect of being a man. Mm-hmm. And I love how the film puts the spotlight on that. On the other hand, you see Don, like I mentioned earlier, manages to have a successful relationship that you can see.
Yeah.
They care about each other in whatever little we see of the mother. I think she's called Dorotea. I don't remember, but because we barely see her, but I think that's her name. And we see Clemenza happens to have a successful marriage, or at least that's what we see, but not the young ones.
Yeah.
And it says a lot about what this new breed of men that I don't know, but I think it does a great job of putting the spotlight on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent point, and Michael in this case is very interesting because of the fact that it's like we see him. He starts out with Kay, and you get the impression that yes, they care about each other. You don't know whether it's necessarily love, but you can tell there's something that they care about. They care about each other, but also Michael understands that if he kills Salasso and McCluskey, he's going to have to get away from Kay and be away from Kay and not say goodbye. And it's actually kind of funny to consider that. And then when he meets Apollina, Apollina in Sicily, a lot of people I think Roger Ebert brought this up in his Great Movies review of the film. He brought up as like now that Michael is more a part of the world that his family is in, he can't go back to Kay. He has to have a wife that is understanding of sort of that world, and for him, Apollina kind of represents that. Being Italian, being being somebody that he can kind of he has affection for, but at the same time you kind of get the feeling that he might see like the relationship that he and his father and his mother have down the road, of where it's like it's loving, but it's also understanding of what the life is. And then when she's killed, that's when that's the last time we see of him in Italy. And that's at that moment where Vito's trying to bring him back. And the next thing we see is, Kay comes back Case comes back into the picture, but it's over a year later. And you kind of wonder, it's like, well, why did it take him so long to reach out to her? And is it just because he was being cautious? Or is it because of the fact that he wasn't quite sure whether he could bring her into what his life is going to be now? And you definitely see the difference between the two from that opening before he kills Salasso and McCluskey to the ending where they're back and they're reunited and they get married and starts to have a family, but there's a distance. And I mean, of course, that distance is perfectly illustrated in the climax of the film, which will send to motion everything we see between them in part 2.
Yeah, and one of the things I wrote in my notes, and maybe it's like you said, maybe what he sees in Apollonia is someone like his mother, is someone that will with whom he can have a relationship, but there can be that divide, something that maybe with Kay wouldn't be possible, and we know it's not possible. But I also wonder, and this is something obviously that the film doesn't and can't answer, but I always wonder if this time in Italy, in Sicily, could have been his out.
Yeah.
I mean, if it could have been his way out of this, and if he didn't have to come back, if he would have stayed there, maybe managed to get out of the family and not get into this crime. But there's always this, and I'm going to use a word that I heard on another podcast, but I think it's something that it's always present, and it's obviously there in the film, and it's the inevitability of him becoming the Don.
Yeah.
I mean, it was inevitable. This was telegraphed from the beginning, and this was meant to happen. And when you see all the other, all his brothers, you see Sonny, you see Fredo, you see him, and you know that he was the one meant to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, because of the fact that, I mean, you don't even need to necessarily see Fredo to know that he doesn't necessarily have the personality for it. And then that's further accentuated in the trip to Vegas with Mo Green. And, he's always going to be somebody who he's essentially going to be a follower. But, because of the fact that he's older than Michael, he's always going to feel like he should have been considered more of a vital part of the family than he really is. We talked a lot about Carlo and Connie. We haven't really talked about Talia Shire. This is arguably her biggest performance and biggest role outside of Rocky. I'm not sure that I think well, okay. I think it's kind of unfair to it would be unfair to I think really kind of rate her performance, because all she's essentially asked to do for the most part is basically yell and be angry at Carlo, and then after he's killed, yell and be angry at Michael. She's not really given much as a character. And that's if I had one complaint, that might be it about the film. But I mean, even that, you know, the rest of the movie is so well developed that it's hard to see even that is necessarily it's not a good thing for Talia Shire in terms of her performance, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker when it comes to the movie as a whole.
And maybe you can say even the same about Kay and Diane Keaton, because great as she is, she doesn't get as much to do. What little she does, she does great, but she doesn't get as much to do as she does, obviously, in the later films. And the same applies to Talia Shire. I mean, she obviously gets a lot more to do in the next two films, especially in the third one. But I think it also says a lot. The message that I think one of the messages that the film I think is trying to transmit, and this is about the role of men and the role of women, and how men are supposed to be, you know, the ones that have control, but ultimately can't. And I think that even there are a couple of lines that say, you know, I don't remember who is that says, you know, children and women can do this or that, but we men have to behave like this and this and this. And I think it allows these female characters, and I think that we see it in Connie, to say, you know, if I want a seat at the table, so to speak, or if I want to have some agency in my life, I need to act like this and I need to do this. And obviously, if we expand this to the next two films, like I said, especially in the third one, where she has a more meat to chew on, you can see that she becomes as ruthless as his brothers and as his father.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I know one of the big kind of debates when it comes to at least the first two. I mean, everybody basically agrees that the third one is considerably lesser than the first two films. But I know as I've growing up and starting to get more and more into movies, you know, there's always been this question of whether the first one is better, whether the second one is better, whether you can really like separate them. Have you ever had a preference of is the first one the one that you would prefer, or would you say the second one is better?
I don't know, man. I tend to go back and forth. I think both are excellent, and I usually see them as just one continuous story.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to separate them. I think that the more, which you mentioned earlier, the more smaller scope, so to speak, of the first one, I think it's a benefit to the film. But I don't think that the second one, when expanding the scope, I don't think it loses focus. I think it's great as well. My favorite scene, like I said, of pretty much I think of every film, is the scene, like I mentioned, of Fredo and Michael. It's obviously on the second one, but I think I can make a case for 3 or 4 scenes in the original that I would rank just about as highly, and I wish we can get at least to one, which is my favorite, just to talk a bit about it. But they're great, and I will throw a bone to the third one, which usually gets a bad rap, and I think the third one gets too much undeserved hate. Yeah. I think the third one, it's a great film on its own. It just suffers from being the third part the follow-up to two of the greatest films pretty much made of all time.
Yeah.
I think it has issues. I think this is a case where the scope, I think, gets a bit out of hand, and I think the story is a bit more convoluted. I think the absence of Duvall was a big mistake. Mm-hmm. I mean, the studio should have given him whatever he wanted. I mean,
Yeah.
they needed to have that man in there.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't work as much as I like the I don't remember the name of the guy that replaces him, Brian something, I think. He's good, but I mean he's not Robert Duvall.
No.
And I'm not even gonna. I usually defend Sofia Coppola because obviously she stepped in at the last minute, and I understand that she wasn't an actress, but I know that the one has issues, but I think it's a great film as well. And I've ranked it very, very highly, and it has one of the greatest scenes also. If I were to mention great scenes across all three films, the confession scene, when Michael finally confesses to the Archbishop, I think that's a great movie scene, and I mean, not as great as the first two, but
Yeah.
I think it's a great film.
No, I definitely agree with you on the third one. I've not seen the Coda yet, the re-edit that just came out a couple of years ago. I'm kind of waiting for the.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the 4K box of all three to do that because I do want to see it. I mean, I'm curious, and I agree. But yeah, I agree with you. The third one is definitely. It definitely gets a lot of undeserved hate. I mean, there are some complaints like Sofia Coppola's performance that are kind of justified, the absence of Tom Reagan, but there are also some really great moments in that too. Yeah, I mean, I know after I had seen the first two, I probably would have said the second one is the best, but I do think as I've watched them more, the first one definitely stands out is the more significant one and as the overall better one just because of the fact that it is so much more. I think it's so much more streamlined, it's so much more focused on what it's trying to say. You know, it's not to say that the back and forth in the narrative in 2 doesn't work. It's just that there are times where the Michael story into doesn't quite grab you quite as much as the rise of Vito Corleone, the De Niro scenes in 2 do. And but yeah, there are so many great moments in this. Like I told you, I was taking notes the other day, and I basically just stopped at a certain point because it's like I mean I've seen this enough to where it's like yeah you can basically think back on moments that you absolutely love. You know, but the thing that is so rich about this movie is the supporting cast, and you have Abe Vigoda as Tessio, you have Sterling Hayden as McCluskey, you have Richard Castellano as Clemenza. I mean, you have Jack Woltz, John Marley as Jack Woltz. You have Al Lettieri as Salazzo. You know, you have Alex Rocco's Mo Green. It's just such a it. You have Lenny Montana as Luca Brasi, who in a couple of scenes just completely defines that character right away, and you see that like you know when Tom Reagan's telling Salazzo, it's like you're not going to be able to call off. You know, Sonny's not going to be able to call off Luca Brasi. And of course, Luca Brasi, we know, is already dead. And, you know, but you believe Tom Waits says that because of the fact that we've seen who Luca Brasi is. We see how devoted he is to the Don. And I mean, this is one of those movies where it's like it's an embarrassment of riches as far as how much of the cast is. And it's one of those things that I also liked about the Batman, to go back to that comparison, where it's like it's not just it felt like one of the first Batman movies that wasn't just about the main 3 or 4 characters. There are moments for like every significant character to the plot. And I really love that about that. And I do feel like that's something that they learned from The Godfather.
You're making me want to watch the Batman. I need to get on that. No, yeah, definitely. Every supporting character is great. And you mentioned Luca Brasi, and he has a few great moments. I love how you see him rehearsing his speech outside of the Don's office. And then even when he walks in, he fumbles it and has to pull out a paper. So you get to see that he's maybe not the brightest bulb, but very devoted, very dedicated, and very. Like we said earlier, those are just some of the stories that you see introduced during that wedding, and I love how we get all of that in those brief moments. Johnny Fontaine is great. I don't remember the name of the actor, but he's great. I love the scene when Michael is finally, recollecting his dues and say, that Don helped you before, so now you're gonna have to sing at the studio at the hotels, and maybe you can get some more people from the movies. And his expression is it's priceless, because you see, I'm tied up. There's a face of I'm doing this, but I don't really want to do this.
Yeah.
But I because it's a debt I have, and it's a debt I don't want, but it's a debt I have. So I love that little scene.
What are some of we've touched on a couple of our favorite scenes. What are some more of the ones that really stand out for you?
Oh man, I'm gonna mention two, and I think they're probably two of the most iconic. And I'm gonna start with not my favorite, but I think the whole scene where Michael at the diner or at the restaurant with McCloskey and Soloso, it's an excellent scene. I mean, I love how Coppola is so patient to build that, and the way the tension he builds that, and I love Pacino's expression in his face and the way Coppola fixes on his face, and he draws that. I mean, Pacino, Michael gets some clear hints of what to do from Clemenza. You have to do this, you have to release the gun, you have to let it fall, you have to come out. And Sonny says the same, you have to come out banging, and you have to two on the head to each. And he doesn't do any of that.
No, he doesn't.
It's funny because he doesn't follow the instructions. I mean, he comes out and he just sits again, and he listens to it, and he waits and waits. And I love that long pause as they are talking, and you can see the focus on Michael's face is great. And then he doesn't drop. I mean, he's pretty much, he waits until he's just about outside of the as he's walking outside of the restaurant. That's when he drops it. Yeah. But I love that scene. I love that scene, and obviously any scene that you get Sterling Hayden. I mean, such an icon of film noir, and to see him there, it's great. But my all-time favorite scene from the first one is the hospital scene. I mean, that scene, that whole scene, it's so great. And this is something that everybody will say, but that really becomes the Don. I mean, and there are so many great little things that Coppola and Pacino throw out to us in that scene. I mean, you see how as soon as Michael steps into the front of the hospital, and he looks like, where is everybody? I mean, there isn't anybody here. He walks in and he's like a detective. I mean, it is something like it's born out of him, because he sees like some sandwiches that were left, and his brain is already working out. Something is happening here. And he's so quick on his feet to think what needs to be done. As soon as he's making a call, he quickly tells the nurse, "Wait, nurse, don't go. because you're gonna have to help me, and we're gonna need to. Okay, we have to move my father here, and he knows exactly what to say. You know who my father is. People are coming to kill him. He knows how to deal with Enzo.
Yeah.
Go there. I mean, it's such a great scene, and it's not something that you see. It feels organic. It feels like it was meant or inevitable, like we were saying earlier. It was meant to happen. There was no escaping this, and maybe you can wonder if he wanted to escape from that. I mean, the times that he says to Kay, "This is not who I am. I'm different." Was he? Is he really different? But that that whole sequence. I mean, you see the scene at the hospital. Then you see when they are planning the Soloso hit.
Yeah.
And he's sitting on the chair, and everybody's, and he's saying, "Oh, we need to do this, and we need to do this, and we need to," and he has it all. I mean, he has control. He's on top of everything, and then obviously the scene at the restaurant, which is the culmination of that, and obviously how he starts his rise. That's why I was thinking about that thing, because just after that he goes to Italy, and was it too late for him? Which is what I was asking earlier, or did he still have time to walk out of this if they hadn't killed Apollonia, or he hadn't been brought back to the States? I mean, but those three sequences, I mean, they are great. Maybe because Pacino is my favorite character, my favorite actor in the film, because you see he does so much with so little. He's so cold, but you can see so much things working out in his brain that I love it.
Yeah, you can definitely tell the analytical side, and that you mentioned the scene in the hospital. It for somebody who isn't a part of the family business, he sure knows how to operate within what the family business would do. And I mean, I think it goes into that whole idea of the mixture of business and personal words. Like you can't help but think of the two as intertwined in this movie, and the idea of just this idea is that the idea that you can separate the two in this is just not possible whatsoever, because of the fact that so much of it is personally driven. Of course, I adore the baptism scene where he takes out all of the people saying his way. The use of the Pascalian fugue in C minor by Bach is to score that scene is just brilliant. And of course, there's the scene where Clemenza and Polly are driving, and Polly they kill Polly because he was not there for the Don. And of course, there's the famous line, it's like, "Leave the gun, take the cannoli." And that scene is so great because of the fact that so much of it is done in montage, and you never really see them interact face to face. You're seeing the car move, and then you're just hearing them in scenes that are very obviously ADR'd. Like, that's very clearly ADR'd, recorded in a studio. It's just really a wonderful piece of storytelling on Coppola's point. But yeah, I mean, the baptism sequence is terrific. The resignation in Tessio when he realizes that, like, he's done for at the end.
He's done.
Yeah. And then, of course, the scene where Michael was telling Carlo, it's like, don't play games with me. I know you're the reason Sonny's dead. And that whole sequence is just tremendous. But yeah, the hospital scene, I think, is definitely one of the peak ones as well. And yeah, that entire stretch from the hospital scene, and yeah, the way he treats Enzo and the fact that Enzo is willing to go for it, and you have that little moment where he's having a hard time lighting his cigarette. He's so nervous. It's just such a, but Michael, he holds that lighter. It's like, I'm cool as a cucumber here. It's like, don't worry, don't get nervous. This is, I just, we need you here. And then of course there's the moment where the favor from the beginning of the movie is paid off in that he has to make his son look presentable for his mother, for his wife. And it's just such a beautiful payoff to that goes to this idea that the Donna's old age is not really interested in vengeance. He's interested in trying to get away from the violence that is consumed his life and consumed his way of life over the years.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of the things you mentioned from the Clemenza and Polly scene is the famous line. I mean, leave the gun, take the cannoli, and that's yet another instance where you see that business and family are really not separated at all, because you hear as soon as he's living with Polly, I think you hear his wife saying, don't forget the cannoli or something like that. And here you are just shooting someone and say, okay, leave the gun, but remember the cannoli because my wife asked me to bring the cannoli. Mm-hmm. So you can't separate that. It's just another example of that. And one of the things that I wanted to bring out, which is something now that you mention again, the favor with Bonacera, is that Enzo, the baker, that was technically that's another favor, because you also see Enzo, the father of Enzo, asking for a favor. That he was about to be expatriated to Italy, and he wanted him to stay so he could marry someone, something like that. And it's something that you can see from the beginning, that everything for this family is a business transaction. Everything is something that I'm doing because I'm going to get something in exchange. All from Bonacera to Enzo, there are so many instances that you see, I'm going to do this, but you have to do something for me. With Johnny, like we mentioned earlier, and there was something that maybe it's a stretch. Maybe I'm picking straws, but when Michael is explaining to Kay who is Tom, he says, he's like our brother. He's not Sicilian. And you think, you see that Vito picked him up when he was a kid, but was there any other purpose to bringing him in the family? I mean, did Vito, was Vito thinking, I'm going to bring this kid and I'm going to take care of him, but eventually he's going to help me with this and this and this because he's not Sicilian, and I'm going to groom him to be my assistant, my lawyer, my consigliere. So I even had that in my mind. Maybe, like I said, I'm stretching, but to go back to my point, you see how everything is like a business transaction. Luca Brasi. I mean, Luca Brasi comes and later on, say, okay, call Luca Brasi because we need him now. Your Don needs you. Bonacera, Enzo, Johnny, everybody's involved, and you see the thing that all these business transactions are being held in a wedding, in a funeral, in a baptism, in the office, in the house. And another thing that I picked up, it's always there, but I kind of noticed more, is that pretty much in every scene there are kids running around screaming and playing and crying in the middle of all this underworld business. And I think that's also notable.
Yeah. No, and one of the last things I want to bring up, and talking, and you talking about the fact that so much of this is a business transaction is, it's one of those things where it's like, we know from what Vito said that he didn't want this life for Michael, but you listen to some of the things that he had aspirations for with Michael, politician, a senator, maybe even a president. It's like you can't help but, thinking about in this context, that would just be another thing to benefit Vito, because then he's got a son. You look at the possibilities of corruption there, and and he knows Michael as well as anybody in terms of his loyalty to family. Is that another sense of, we're not going to bring Michael into the family business, but we're also not going to keep him on, we're going to keep him on a relatively short leash too.
Yeah, there's an interest in the future there, and maybe not entirely related to that point, but something that I remember from that conversation about the senator, Senator Corleone, Governor Corleone, is that Vito says to Michael, I thought you were going to be the one who holds the strings.
Yeah.
But later on, and like I said, we see this here, but maybe more in the second part. Who's actually holding the strings? I mean, all the time, that the Corleone and to a certain extent, which is maybe a reality in the America that we're talking about, who holds the strings? Is it the politicians, or is it the powerful businessmen and businessmen, legal businessmen and illegal businessmen? Are they the ones that are holding the strings? The corporations, the underworld, and whatever. They are the ones that are moving the pawns around and buying politicians so they can decide on their favors.
And I think that is probably one of the reasons why the Godfather still endures so much, is that those, unfortunately, those themes have not really gone away from the idea of society. And this was like right around the time of, this was not quite Watergate when the movie came out, but like certainly the second one was right smack in the middle of Watergate. So you have this idea of corruption, you have this idea of strong people, and I mean by that point, even by that point, you kind of had a feeling of who Nixon was as a politician, and it's just really fascinating to see that these. And kind of depressing to see how these ideas are still relevant, and even away from those ideas, Coppola has still managed to make them a movie that is profoundly seductive on an entertainment level as well as an artistic level, and it's the God. That's one of the reasons why The Godfather is still going to endure. That's why even with great gangster movies afterwards, like Goodfellas, like The Departed, I mean, The Godfather will always stand just a little bit above those because of the fact that it's done something. Scorsese does the same kind of thing, I think, in Goodfellas, but in a very different way. But the way that Coppola does it in The Godfather is just it's singular, and I think it really just it takes the pulp aspects of what crime films were before it and elevates it into a level of art that has really transformed everything that's come after it.
Yeah, definitely agree. I don't think, obviously I love the film, and obviously it ranks very, very highly for me in my personal favorite films. So I agree, it's an iconic film in pretty much every aspect, from direction to writing to performance, which we mentioned. I can't think of a single weak performance on it. Editing, the editing is perfect. Cinematography, I really can think of a single flaw in that film. So you can see how it serves as a stepping stone for other filmmakers, and as an inspiration for anybody that wanted to make not just a crime film, but any film.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And Carlo, it's been a lot of fun talking to you about The Godfather today, and I look forward to the next time we have a discussion coming up.
Definitely, thanks for inviting me, and it was an honor and a lot of fun. Like I said, always fun to talk about one of my favorite films.
And where can people find you online?
So they can look out the Movie Loot on any podcasting platform: Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Castbox, anywhere. Or you can just look at the website, tmml.buzzsprout.com. Or you can talk to me on Twitter at TeefCG, or the podcast at TMML2021. And I'm always glad to chat with anybody that wants to talk movies. I'm always glad to share my thoughts and just engage with people.
Yeah, definitely hit Carlo up on Twitter. It's really fun to interact with him, and I'm glad to have gotten to know you, and to continue discussions we've had on Twitter and podcast form between our two shows. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a great day.
Hey, this is David from the Piecing It Together podcast, a podcast about movies and the movies that inspire them. For over 4 years, each week, a guest and I take a look at a new movie through the lens of what other movies we think were either an influence or connect in some other way. It's a fun, unique way to discuss films that leads to a great list of other movies to check out that either explore the same themes and ideas or maybe utilize similar filmmaking techniques. Including special episodes in our side series that twist the format, we've done over 200 episodes, so there's bound to be one on a film you've been thinking about and want to dig deeper into. So check us out on all the major podcasting apps and at piecingpod.com.
I'd like to thank Carlo for his time to talk about The Godfather. It is always good to talk to him, and check out his podcast, The Movie Loot. It's a really fun premise for a podcast, and check out our discussion on silent cinema on that. It was really terrific, and it's kind of exciting to get into that discussion. This is going to be a busy couple months for the Silent Cinema podcast. We've got our annual Oscar discussion, which will also include a guest for the first time, and we're also going to bring somebody new onto the podcast, and we're going to talk about baseball movies. And Tim Cox is going to join us, and we are going to talk about some more established classics. For now, this is Brian Scuttle. Thank you very much for listening to the Sonic Cinema Podcast, wherever you listen, and join us again at www.soniccinema.com.